You're listening to the greatest multifamily investment advice show. My name is Adam Ras, and now I'm talking everything multifamily for an in-depth conversation, and I will be diving deep into raising capital, deals, and underwriting process. Welcome back to the greatest multifamily advice show. Today we have Mathew Frederick, an exceptional guest and real estate investor out of Toronto region of Ontario. Focus on scaling his multifamily and different other strategies like self-storage and the US real estate market. Please help me to welcome our guest, Mathew. How are you, Mathew?
Fantastic, and it's great to be here.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much for being with us today, and I appreciate you taking the time. So
always great to be here.
Thanks. Mathew, your background is super impressive, from an immigrant and teacher to successful real estate investor. But I would like to start with beginning. What was the motivation to say, I want to start real estate?
Well, a lot of people started off by always sort of knowing real estate was a thing for them. For me, it wasn't that way. You know, when I was 16, being an immigrant, I thought, I came to Canada in 1972. So by the time I was 16, it's been ingrained in me to, you're new here, got to work twice as hard to get as far, and it's important to own a piece of Canada. So from 16 to 19, I had a job, which it was a business I created, where I would drop off cookbooks and sell them for about $14, buy them for $4, drop them to businesses, have the secretary sell them for me, and then come with all the new cookbooks and obviously give her one for free or give him one for free. You know, by the time I was 19, I was able to buy a house for around $85,000 because back in those days, houses were $85,000.
Yeah.
And I bought it. My parents helped me a little bit, but I was not an investor. I just wanted to have something to help me to pay my rent. So my house had a basement apartment and a main floor and second floor. I was on the main and second floor, and we shared a kitchen. So today, maybe you call that house hacking. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Back then, we called it you buy a house and you share a kitchen. My brother, 4 years later, I was a teacher by that time. He came to me and said, I want you to invest in real estate. And I go, I'm not doing it. I'm a teacher. I invested my time in that. And I already have a property. But he says, hey, I'm your brother. I'm your older brother. I'm a cop, got a gun. You know what? You're going to invest because I'm a systems guy. So he kind of pulled me into it, dragged me into it fighting. So it was really not my choice. Like a superhero, you know, Superman didn't plan to be Superman, and Spider-Man didn't plan to be Spider-Man. You know, Spider-Man got bitten. Superman, his parents threw him in a ship. Yeah. So it was more like that. I didn't plan to be an investor. My brother pulled me into it. I had no choice, but I'm happy.
Okay. So you started your career was, I think, like everyone, single family, since the evolution of multifamily. But as we discussed before the show, I would like to focus on the self-storage industry. So that's why I was going to try to ask you about what is your target market when you're working on self-storage business, especially that, as we mentioned, that nationwide, we have like 4,000 to 5,000 self-storage all over Canada. So what is your target market right now, when you're looking for self-storage?
Well, I will say to you that self-storage in the last 3 or 4 years has probably increased by at least 60%.
No.
And I've been doing this self-storage for going back about 15, 16 years, right? Just really quickly, how I got into it. I had some cottages up in the Haliburton area. I used to bring a coffee for a gentleman whenever I was in town, like driving towards Haliburton, because I liked him, old timer. And I would chat with him. And he had cancer. I didn't realize that. And years later, he had cancer. And he said, you know what, I have colon cancer. I'm actually dying. I go, my God, you know, I feel horrible. He says, I want you to buy my self-storage system. I go, I don't buy self-storage. They're kind of ugly. I like houses. I'm a house guy. He goes, no, self-storage will treat you well. I go, no. I'm not into self-storage. He goes, trust me. I can sell this for whatever I want, but you have been stopping and bringing me coffee once a month whenever you come up, and I want you to have it. So you know what? I thought, okay, I'll buy it. And he gave me a vendor take-back mortgage, and I bought it. And it's the most profitable real estate class that I've ever done business in. You know, no fridge, no stove, no washer, no dryer, no kids, no pets. People are renting a space. I have my security system. It's amazing. And on top of it all, I've done strip plaza, I've done multifamily, I've built houses. So I can tell you self-storage is it for me. Today, it's kind of hard to find self-storage within the city. And I'll tell you that if you buy a piece of land that's not zoned for self-storage, cities don't want to zone it for self-storage. Therefore, you have to get something industrial. And generally, they're around highways, industrial areas. So it's hard to buy them in Toronto, GTA. But if you're looking to get into it, maybe an hour out of Toronto, 45 minutes, but you have to make sure that there's growth in the area, growth of new people coming into the area. Students come in, go to school and stay, like in Kitchener, for instance, as opposed to going to a school in a town and leave, right? You want growth.
100%. But going to this point, when you're dealing with different kind of strategies on self-storage, plazas, and commercial mainly, and then multifamily, this is like a little bit too wide of range of markets, and why you're not in just one market? Because there's two strategies here. Some people like to have diversity, and some people like to have just one niche and focus on. So what is your strategy here about this?
So both methods are correct.
Yeah.
And at heart, I'm an explorer. So I live to learn. I enjoy learning. Yeah. And I love the challenge of new things. Yeah. And because I love to explore and I love new things, it would be very hard for me to stay in one category and just grow in that one category, number one. Number two, technically, I bought my first house 37 years ago. I've been a full-time investor for 32 years. So where were you 32 years ago, right? Yeah. Now, the market has changed over 32 years. Sometimes interest rates were 9% and properties were appreciating 5%. Today, the interest rates were like 2% and properties are appreciating 17%. To think that one strategy will last in one season for 32 years just wasn't the case. There were times that buy, fix, and sell worked. And there was times that rent to owns worked. But when the market is at the top, how do you promise somebody that they're buying a house, renting to own it, and you give them a price 3 years from now that's higher when the market might collapse? 100%. There's a season for different types of strategies. And therefore, I'm an explorer, number one, but number two, to survive, I'm a hunter. I had not a literal hunter, but you know what? If you're a real estate investor, you're not a farmer. You're not planting, you're hunting. And sometimes you have to follow the caribou. Yeah. And over 32 years, I followed the caribou. I would love to stay in one spot and just hopefully the buffalo come to me, but it wasn't the case in real estate. And that's the two reasons why I've diversified.
I like this, to be honest, the diversity, because everyone in the last 10 years was focused only on forced appreciation with BRRRR. But me personally, as you said, you've been on the market for 37 years. I've been on the market for 7 years. And I didn't see before this. I was an immigrant also. So this was my struggle in the beginning. Do I have to have a diverse portfolio or just focus? But I didn't have this perspective, which is, of course, I understand, because the market is not always like this with appreciation. So right now it's working with a BRRRR because of appreciation market, but what will happen after that? So yeah, it makes sense.
So most of my investing career, I've done BRRRR, but interest rates were 6% and properties were naturally appreciating 5%. And then at the same time, banks were very conservative. Yeah. So you're not BRRRRing at 2% rate and 17% increase without, like, before you put money into it. That only exists in the last 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Because again, you said that the banks also was conservative for the appraisals. So even if you add BRRRR, where are you going to find this kind of money to pull out so you can have an actual, what we say is perfect BRRRR? Exactly. Okay. So going back again to the self-storage, to just understand and have an analysis like apple to apple little bit on the market about multifamily and self-storage. So if we're comparing the actual regular profits on the market, so what is your target cap rate when you're looking for self-storage?
Well, self-storage, people can use a cap rate, but it's harder to calculate cap rate on self-storage in a sense. as a comparison to, let's say, multifamily.
Yeah.
I will say to you that the difference is when you have self-storage, if you buy a good piece of land that's not overpriced, you have a proper number of units, you're really looking for cash flow because self-storage will not appreciate like a multifamily. But self-storage would make 3 times or 4 times the cash flow, 3 or 4 times the cash flow as a multifamily. And at the same time, the stress level to maintain it and the cost out of your pocket is far less, but the appreciation is not there like a multifamily. Multifamily will not cash flow like a self-storage. There's a lot more energy you have to put into multifamily because you have families, but it'll appreciate greater. So you have to ask yourself, am I in this for cash flow or am I in this for appreciation? And sometimes you might want to have both, where you're getting cash flow to put dollars in your pocket and you have multifamily, which will make some cash flow, but will appreciate greater over the next 5-10 years. If you asked me a year ago, cap rate on a multifamily, I like to buy 3.5% to 4%. Everybody's trying to sell multifamily at 2% cap rate. Like everybody thinks if they're living in Welland, they think that's Kitchener, which is probably a 3.5% cap rate. And so now that the cap rates are out of whack, hopefully things will get back into gear because people are trying to sell their properties at 2%, which it doesn't make sense. I like to buy multifamily at 3 to 5% cap rate. My self-storage is, I haven't bought a self-storage in about 10 years, but the cap's higher, 7, 8, 9%.
Okay.
Because keep in mind, your expenses are very low.
Yeah, we're getting to this point, but before we go to the expenses and NOI, what about the actual market rate for the internal rate of return, the IRR?
You know what? I think, the self-storage is superior, right, to the multifamily by far.
Okay.
The financing is what becomes a problem. It's harder to finance self-storage than it is to finance multifamily.
Oh, okay.
So if you're buying self-storage, chances are you try to get a VTB, and then you try to make sure you fill that unit up or that location up. It takes about 2 years from zero to fill up a self-storage.
Okay. So one of the other things is between the multifamily and self-storage is the vacancy rate. So usually on multifamily, you're looking for 95% always, if it's not better. But on self-storage, what is your target vacancy rate?
Well, on most self-storage, I target 90%. But here's the problem. My self-storage is always 100%. In other words, I have a waiting list.
Okay.
Now, so why not just rent it at 100%? Because what happens if you rent a self-storage at 100%, which is different than a multifamily, is that somebody who has, let's say, a 10 by 15, they want to move down to a 10 by 10. But they can't move down because you're 100% capacity.
Okay.
So therefore, they'll leave. They'll go somewhere else. Or somebody who's got a 10 by 10 wants to go to a 10 by 15. You have no space for them. They'll leave. Okay. And if you're 100% capacity, people will drive by you and you'll become irrelevant. So I could make way more money at 90% capacity on a self-storage than I can on a multifamily for equal price if I had bought both units for both properties for equal price.
Is this came from try and error, or was this was actual market strategy? Is this coming from you, like your strategy, like try and error? You tried the other way around and you compare apple to apple?
Yeah, so this comes from me. That I found when I was 100% capacity with self-storage, I was losing out. I was losing because people would leave and they would never come back. And sometimes you don't want to leave a good person. Now, how is it's different from multifamily? Someone's in multifamily. If they say, you know what, I have a tenant in multifamily, they've been here for 15 years. That's not good news because they're probably paying a rent of $700 when it should be $1,400.
Yeah.
When it comes to self-storage, you want somebody there a very long time. If they're there for 1 or 2 years, just consistently paying you $500 a month for that unit, you want a long-term tenant. So I find that a good long-term tenant is required in self-storage, and I lose my good long-term tenant if I don't have a space for them to upsize or downsize, which is opposite to multifamily. Multifamily, I love my tenants, but if they leave, if they're paying a low rent, I'm okay with that.
But to this point, because you said you want to have people for long term, but at the same time, because self-storage is commercial space, so it's not under rent control. So the other part of the play, if you have every year a tenant, you're gonna have a better rent because it's not up to the rent control. You get what I'm saying? But on like a multifamily is different. You have a cap anyway.
Yeah. So when it comes to, let's say, renting a 10 by 15, let's say that you rent it for, I'm going to pick a number, $500.
Yeah.
Next year, that's not going to go up to 700. Basically, that's going to be 510, 495, 520, 480. It bumps up $10 here or there. Therefore, your storage rental, you're not looking for it to bump up every year. Like, let's say you would like it to, but it generally doesn't.
Yeah, okay.
Like a multifamily. So if somebody's there for 3 years, pay me $500, I could build into the lease whatever I want to build in, because it's not regulated. I can say after the first year, I'm going to increase it by $15. Next year, increase it by $15. Chances are they might just leave. So ultimately, I'm okay if they're consistent. I'm okay if they pay me $500. I don't care for the extra 20 if I can keep them there for a longer time. Okay. Now, if it were a multifamily and you're paying $500 and the market rent is now $800, I want the $800.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you want consistency. You want people who can respect the property, and people who don't store things that can cause issues for you.
Okay. Okay. So going back to the expenses part, because again, another comparison between multifamily and self-storage. So what is regular and basic expenses on self-storage?
Well, self-storage is about 36% cost. Let's say to operate it. Okay. And about 26% is your mortgage in general. And then you may want an 8% vacancy. So how does that work out? I know it's not great to tell numbers, but for instance, if I were to get 1 acre, and that's pretty much too small, but an acre can hold about 43,560 square feet, in that range. Well, if you have 1 acre and you have a 30 feet wide by 100-foot depth self-storage, I'm talking one level with the garage doors, that's 3,000 square feet, 30 by 100. You can put 5 of those 30 wide by 100 deep, 3,000 square foot buildings on an acre. So now you have 15,000 square feet. So 5 buildings times 3,000. The land ratio is 35%, which means you can only use 35% of the land, because people have to drive around and sort of, pull in and empty their
utilize the space. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're only using 35% of the land. The rest of it is for people to drive around. Now, let's say you have one building, one of these 3,000 square foot buildings has 22 units, and it's a whole mix of units. And if you have 5 buildings, then you have 5 times 22, you have 110 units. Okay. At 110 units, if the average rent of 110 units was $250 a unit, and by the way, if you have a 10 by 15, that could be 500. If you have a 10 by 10, it could be, 450. But let's say you had 110 units, which is the 5 buildings. Now it's $250 per unit. That's 27,500 coming in that month. Now with 27,500, which is 110 times 250, when you subtract away 36% operating costs from 27,500, that's about 9,900, 36%. And then let's say your mortgage is 26%, that's 7,150. Let's say your vacancy, you want some vacancy, so 8%, 2,200. Your cash flow is 8,000 from 27,500 minus 990, 36%, minus 7,150, 26% for your debt service, minus 8% vacancy, 2,200. $8,000 for that 1 acre of cash flow.
On
now, I don't know
how many units?
Well, altogether, it's 115 units. Sorry, it's 110 units.
Okay.
Because if you recall, each building is 30 by 100, it's 3,000 square feet.
Yeah.
3,000 times 5 buildings, you got 15,000 square feet. Each building has 22 units. When I say 22, I mean you have about 5 smaller 5x10s, got a bunch of 10x15s, got a bunch of 10x10s, and a bunch of 10x30s, all at different rents.
Makes it use, yeah.
But with that one unit with 22 units, that one building with 22 units, times 5, 22 times 5 is 110. 110 times 250 is the 27,500.
Yeah.
We subtract away your 36% operating cost, your 26% debt service, and your 8% vacancy, your cash flow is $8,000. I don't know what building is giving me $8,000 for the same price that I paid for this self-storage. Obviously, if the land is more expensive, you have to go up an extra level. And if the land is even more expensive, you have to go up a third level. So you see a lot of these 144,000 square foot 3-story buildings. That has to happen because the land nowadays used to be $500,000 an acre. Maybe it's $1 million an acre. Maybe it's $2 million an acre, $2 million an acre. But again, it's a lot of cash flow.
So as you mentioned, like on multifamily, usually the expense is about 50 to 60%, but you're saying that on the self-storage is about 35%, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So what kind of expenses you have? Like you mentioned security, you mentioned I think utilities. What else main expenses on self-storage? So
expense will be your insurance, but of course I want each of my units to have self-insurance. So they have to insure their own unit. So I have to have insurance. I have to have internet. I have to have security cameras. I may have a location, a storefront, a small one, where somebody might be there Wednesday, Saturday. It depends on how, like, the busy times in your area. So I may have a full-time employee, one employee on Wednesday, on Monday, maybe Friday, sometimes Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. Saturday's a busy day. Got to cover them. And then at the same time, I have to shovel the snow. That costs money to clear the driveway. And generally that's it. There's grass that has to be cut. And really, the lights are the common area lights, which are the lights for the parking, for the driveway. And then of course, your heat for your building, if you have a building. So it's not really major expense. Your labor, and some self-storages don't have labor. You pull up and you use a card and the gate opens and you go in 24 hours, you do your thing, you come back out and you drive back out again. But I think it's important to have at least 1 or 2 days with somebody there in a little small store. And your little small store can sell things, boxes and accessories, bubble wrap and things like that, right?
100%. My next question will be about creativity and unique strategies for self-storage, especially as you mentioned, it was a really good example about how expensive and appreciated market, you have to be more creative. So what is your strategy in appreciated market? And when you have problem with municipalities about restriction and zoning, and when there's an actual vicious competition, like again in Ontario, so what is your actual strategy so you can get more of that space?
Well, you might want to combine your self-storage with another concept where, let's see, who's using self-storage these days? A lot of seniors who sell their houses and just can't part with their stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of immigrants are entrepreneurial and they store some of their material, their import export, or let's say you're a craftsman, or let's say that you fix elevators or something. You store your stuff in your garage, and that's not a safe place to store things. People can break into that. They quicker store their equipment in a self-storage, and they can come to the self-storage, take what they need, and they can go out. To make more money, you would have, let's say, a building space where someone can shower. They can shower, change, and then they can grab the material. Because sometimes if you're self-employed, you have to go and get quotes. And then you have to jump into your clothes and your work clothes, and you have to go and actually work on site. It's a combination. So it might be that you offer additional services. Like, for instance, you might have coffee. You might have a room for people to get together, like a meeting room. You might even have little small office spaces where people can rent on a weekly basis. You may sell all the things required to package and store things. In other words, a little bit different. You may even have locations for, you may get a post box in a sense where people come and get their mail. Yeah. So it's a lot of additives. It could be people get their mail, You might have some kind of a cafe there. So it's a combination of self-storage and a business. It's like a business center. You might even have a shared laser printer. So almost like a shared office space community center along with the storage. But of course, the storage would have to be also what's called clean storage, nice, safe indoor storage, as well as external storage. In other words, what I'm saying is you have to try to combine more services than just a regular self-storage.
Yeah. I see a lot of businesses, realtors and manufacturers using their self-storage as a storage for them for like documentation, materials. So yeah, I agree with you on this part. So going back to multifamily versus self-storage, if you're comparing between pros and cons between the two strategies, because you have both of them. So
yes,
you agree that both of them has some pros and cons. So for you, what was the actual comparison between the both businesses?
Well, on a personal level, because I came up through the ranks, which means I had houses, then I had buildings. There's so many years and years of dealing with tenants. Of course, I have property managers who deal with my tenants now. But what it does, it creates a bit of a negative feeling in you. Sometimes after I've been to war, because sometimes having tenants is like being to war, and I also have excellent tenants. I find that when I'm talking to a tenant, sometimes I'm kind of looking at their neck. I want to squeeze their neck, right? I don't feel that way when I'm with self-storage because I don't have to karate chop somebody in the neck, right?
Yeah.
Now, so I find that dealing with people, which is fantastic, you got great property managers, self-storage, it's a lot less of that. Somebody comes in, they put their stuff in. The only problems I ever have is somebody backs into a door. That's about it. And then if you're storing Harley Davidsons or if you're storing Honda Civic parts, I don't allow that. I don't allow the storage of tires because that's flammable. The Harley Davidsons and the Honda parts, people like to steal that. So I don't tend to allow people to store what can be stolen. And at the same time, you can always have a drug dog, police drug dog, come check out your units once every 4 months, right? But I found that it's a lot more labor intensive to deal with a multifamily. Whereas with the self-storage, it's a lot less labor intensive. And I found the cash flow with the self-storage superior to the multifamily. But I found the multifamily has doubled in value and tripled in value
on appreciation.
Whereas my self-storage, like I bought a self-storage for $680,000 a while ago. And at the same time, I bought a multifamily for around the same price. That multifamily, like 15 years later, is worth from the 680, it's worth about 2.8 million. Technically, the self-storage, cities don't like them, like the old type. They're ugly. Well, that self-storage has gone up probably to 1.2 million. And in the last 3 years, because people are so gung-ho for it, I can probably sell it for 1.8. But that's only because people are gung-ho for it.
Yeah.
So self-storage will not appreciate like a building will. That's really the big difference. And again, to get financed, you're getting 55% financed in some cases, and cities tend not to want to allow you to grow unless you can show that you're doing more with the land. See, the land is not being utilized with self-storage. Whereas with a multifamily, you have a higher density.
Yes.
And cities prefer density. More density, more property taxes. More property taxes, more people working, more taxes. Whereas self-storage is not going to pay the taxes that a multifamily building will. So the city likes the building as opposed to the self-storage. And the self-storage hires only one person, maybe two.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, it's hard to compare them. It all depends on you, how much stress you want to go through, what type of income you want. And it's okay to have both. And it's hard to get self-storage. So I would say for every 3 buildings you can find, you have 3 buildings. If you had 1 self-storage, that would be great. If you had 6 buildings and 1 self-storage, that would be great as well. Because the self-storage is what pays for when my building, see, my buildings look as though they make great cash flow. But when anything goes wrong, you know, you're expecting 4,000 cash flow that year. I'm just giving an example. Sorry, you're expending, let's say you're expecting a cash flow of $12,000. When anything goes wrong with that building, 12,000 can leave pretty quickly. Having the self-storage, has put the money in my pocket to make up the difference, to make multifamily very viable. One supports the other.
The different strategies. Okay. The diversity.
If I'm trying to borrow against my portfolio to buy another building, self-storage is not helping me. So you can see how there's a symbiotic relationship. You got 5 or 6 buildings, you got one self-storage. Self-storage will help compensate for the shortfalls of the building.
If something happens,
buildings will compensate for the shortfall of the self-storage when you want to refinance.
Makes sense.
It's not one or the other.
So going back to one of the important points is the lending as a commercial space. What is your strategy when you're dealing with commercial space with hard money and vendor take back and regular lender B? So what is the actual differences on the lending side besides the 55%? It's 50%, I think, on the commercial space. Is 50% loan to value?
Well, yes. Actually, for most of the strip plazas I've bought, it's 35%, right? And if you're buying obviously above 6 units, banks would want you to, even a multifamily, they would want you to put 35% down, right? You know, and the same with
65 to 75. Yeah, 65 to 75 loan to value.
Yeah. So most of my commercial buildings, like my multifamilies, I put 35% down.
Yeah.
Most of my strip plazas, I put 35% down. Of course, not every bank is the same. Not every credit union is the same. Not every trust company is the same. They all have their sweet spots.
Line. Yeah,
exactly. But I found that what I tend to do is I get my private money from building owners. So I find buildings that were purchased maybe in 2003, 2004, 2005. That generally means the owner is about maybe 60 to about 75 years of age. And I call them and I say, hey, I want to buy your building. It's an incredible building. And they say, it's not for sale. I go, let me ask you a question. Do you ever lose the desire to invest in real estate? Like, do you lose it? And they say, no, you don't lose it. I says, well, are you still growing? They say, no, I'm not still growing. So you're not growing. You got tons of equity and you're not buying. They say, that's right. I go, how come? They say, well, I'm too old. I go, you know what? Let me be your Viagra. Let me go in there and do all the physical work for you, and you can still enjoy buying buildings, living vicariously through me. I tell them that. Let me be your Viagra. I know it sounds weird, but you got to stun them. Okay?
Correct.
Because guess what? These guys are not the kind of investors who are stuck in the stock market or stuck other places. I don't have to convince them real estate works. They bought a property in 2003 worth probably $500,000. Today it's worth $4 million. And they got a ton of equity. So I say to them, I want to get involved in real estate. I want to get involved in self-storage, or I want to buy multifamily buildings. Let's get into a partnership where you provide the dollars and the financing, whether they give me a private loan, whether they give me equity to come in as a partner. And most of them want to come in as a partner for equity. Then ultimately, that's how I fund most of my deals. And then if I can't do that, then I go to the bank next. So I'm not really a big bank guy. After 1 or 2 years of stabilizing a property, increasing the revenue, reducing the expense, getting the riffraff out, I'm in a position now to say, okay, let me go to the bank and get bank financing. But most of my properties, I go to building owners who are not thinking of selling, not thinking of loaning money, just want to still be in the game.
So it's like more like a VTB or promissory note, or?
In a lot of cases, it's a joint venture partnership where they come in as a partner and they're on title of the building that we're buying, but I am held as I'm a bare trustee, which means they're holding the building for the benefit of myself.
Okay.
And all the cash flow, or 50% of it, 50% of the appreciation, 50% of the mortgage pay down is promised to me over the next 5 years.
Okay.
But I do all the heavy lifting. Sometimes they may just give me a private loan, and they're not looking to make 10 or 12%. They just want to be better than the GIC or better than the mutual fund, because these guys are much older, right? You know, they're comfortable.
Yeah.
So if I get a private loan from them, they have the equity, they lend the private money out. It's only 8%, which is not great, but it's not 12%. So
yeah,
in
because
both cases,
12% is you're dealing with hard money. So you're not going to make any money or cash flow if you're going this high for a long time.
Exactly. But they invest not as much into the investment. They invest in a certain standard of how I see the world. I tell them the way I grew up, when you make a mistake, you say sorry. You come square with the house, which means you pay your due. Then you go to the back of the line and you work your way up. Because today people say, I'm sorry. And then they say, what's next?
Yeah.
Like my nephews, I love them. They were moving something out of my house a few years ago. They dropped a drawer, damaged it. It was like a $6,000 thing. And it says, we're so sorry. Let's go for lunch. I go, what do you mean, let's go for lunch? You're going to do my lawn for the next 2 years. You're going to wash my car for the next 2 years. Oh, we can't do that. That's like slavery.
It's not. Is he going to do it?
To them, sorry was it. Sorry just meant I'm sorry and there's no payback.
Yeah.
Well, folks who are in the 60s and 70s and 80s appreciate a person who says, when I say sorry, I come square with the house. I pay my dues. And then I go to the back of the line. And that's code for I am just like you. They see past your color. They see past your ethnic background. They see past your gender. They see past your age. That is just one thing I say of maybe 8 or 9 things. But these things have to be said.
100%.
It's a code, right?
Yeah. To deal as an actual relationship, so you can, because you're saying most of your joint venture is with people, not with that organization like Mac or Hard Money, which is making more sense because you're gonna make potentially a better return when you're dealing with equity partners.
So if you want to scale, just really quickly, because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Scaling really, people used to go 3 hours to get water and they come home and they do that twice in a day. That's 6 hours.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, somebody invented indoor plumbing. That took a massive increase of technology to invent indoor plumbing, but it reduced time and it reduced effort. If I were to borrow private money, which is nothing wrong with that, if I borrowed private money for 1 year, it increases my stress level because I have to return that money in 1 year.
Yeah.
And investors, if I get money from investors, now they're like, my God, I want my money back. I want to see something in about 1 year. When you have a better system, you're not supposed to be increasing your stress and your effort. Your system's supposed to take care of that. Like a bicycle is a better thing than a tricycle. Better system. So therefore, when I get people who are equity investors, I give them a piece of the pie. In other words, it's your money. You come on in with me and you're a partner with me. And we'll discover how we'll end that partnership. It might be in 5 years, refinance, and I'm gone. 5 years, refinance, you're gone. 5 years, I take over the mortgage. Or 5 years from now, we go 5 more years. But making money with partners where they get a piece of the pie, not a million partners. Most of my properties is just with 1 or 2 other partners, mostly one partner. And you know what? As long as everybody gets a piece of the pie, we're good to go. But I don't have to rush and pay them back. Because now I have 5 years to make this thing work.
Yes.
And I'm not looking for partners who only have $50,000. I'm looking for wealthier partners who own buildings. And they're cool under fire. So now I'm not stressed. In other words, my system reduces time, reduces effort. Because you can get yourself 10 properties and pat yourself in the back for getting financing from 10 different places. My God, you're amazing. But at the end of the year, you want to shoot yourself. Because now you have to repay all that money. And the pressure you put yourself under, you just lost your family.
100%. Because
so
a different stress here when you're dealing with hard money. If you're not performing, they're gonna take the land or the property. But with equity partner, if something disaster happen, you can describe and explain the reasoning. How this year we didn't perform, and as you mentioned, you have 5 years to adjust and make it work.
And the biggest problems I've ever had is making anxious decisions by putting myself into the fire, having 5 or 6 properties I've just bought, and all of a sudden trying to fight out of that fire. And what happens is even the most ethical person begins to second guess and rationalize things. And I remember 1 year I made $2 million, my first year. And guess what? I had to pay 1.1 million in tax. And I had a problem with that. I didn't pay it. And the CRA came after me for under reporting $375,000. And I was wrong, but I couldn't bring myself to that. And guess what? I learned my lesson. I had to pay the price and I learned my lesson. But why was I in that situation? Because I put myself into a pressure cooker where I was fighting for my survival because of the type of financing that I put myself into. And the partners that I brought in were partners who need their money back right away.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after I went through that, I said, you know what? Who the hell am I responsible to? Mathew Frederick, 10 years from now. 47-year-old Mathew Frederick is responsible to 57-year-old Mathew Frederick. And by the way, I'm 57. And I thank the 47-year-old Mathew Frederick for not being a jerk and trying to buy up everything he sees and try to get financing just because he could, and then try to impress himself or impress somebody to buy 20 properties in a year or two. I had to grow up, is what I'm saying. I'm responsible for my future self.
Yeah. For today, I think we're going to need to another, I'm going to say part 2, when you have availability to talk about self-storage in details. But my next question will be how the people can follow your success and contact you.
Well, they can actually reach my email. It's Mathew with 1 T, so MATHEW.F at rccsol.com, or they can go to my website, rccsol.com. And I've created about 100 videos, about 1,500 hours of my time, about 75 hours of video. It's not free, but they can get that at rccsol.com/videos. And there's also some podcasts like yours that are there that I've been a guest at, a pleasure to be a guest of, and they can hear some of those things. But people need to know that I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've had great success, but most of the mistakes I've made was through anxiousness. I was anxious to get to the next level. I was not in peace in my moment. You have to be in peace where you are and know where you want to go, and be peace where you want to go. Or else you'll tend to rationalize things in the wrong way.
But what we can say is that we're going to promise the listeners that you're going to come back for part 2 for the self-storage, because it's interesting subject and business strategy here in Ontario, especially on the cash flow. And again, we appreciate your time and thanks for joining us today. And appreciate it.
I love being here.